There's a secret buried in America's deserts, a truth few ever mention. During World War II, hundreds of captured Japanese women were brought to U.S. soil, expecting torture. What they found instead would change them forever. The journey began in silence. Bound and blindfolded, the women thought they were being taken to their deaths. But when the train stopped, the air was dry, warm, and strangely calm. New Mexico, not hell. An American officer greeted them with a translator and water. "You are prisoners," he said, "but you are also human." It was the first time they'd heard that word used for them since capture. Inside the camp, they braced for humiliation. Instead, soldiers handed out soap, uniforms, and towels. A nurse named Aiko whispered, "This must be a trick." But when she touched the clean cotton, her hands shook. Meals came twice a day: bread, stew, and something called coffee. The women refused it at first, sure it was poison. Then one American guard took a sip himself and said simply, "See? We don't lie." That phrase would echo in Aiko's mind for years. We don't lie. She had been taught Americans had no honor, no soul. Yet here they were, organized, disciplined, gentle even in victory. The camp had rules, strict ones, but they weren't cruel. Lights out at 9, daily exercise, letters allowed once a month. It was prison by name, but it felt strangely just. When she cut her hand during kitchen duty, an American medic rushed to help. His hands were firm, careful, and his voice calm. "Don't worry," he said. "We take care of everyone." She didn't know whether to believe him, not until she saw him treat one of his own soldiers the same way. There was no hierarchy of mercy here. That was America's quiet power, fairness without fanfare. At night, guards played harmonicas by the fence, songs soft as the desert wind. The women listened, some crying, others pretending not to. It was the first time music didn't sound like war. In the morning, the flag rose above the camp. The women watched as the guards saluted, not with hatred, but pride. Aiko couldn't understand it then, but she felt something unfamiliar: respect for her captors. Days passed, and the fear began to fade. The Americans didn't strike, didn't starve, didn't degrade. They worked with order, discipline, and a strange decency that felt more dangerous than any weapon. For Aiko, the true shock wasn't survival. It was discovering the humanity of those she'd been ordered to hate. America's strength wasn't just its guns, it was its mercy. And in that mercy lay the secret she would carry home: that even in war, not all victories were won with violence. Morning in the camp began not with shouts, but with order. A bugle played softly through the desert air, and the guards lined up as neatly as soldiers in ceremony. Even in victory, they followed rules. That was the first lesson. Breakfast came next. The prisoners received oatmeal, fruit, and bread. To them, it was a feast. One woman whispered, "Why do they feed us like guests?" The guard only replied, "Because that's what we do." Aiko couldn't forget those words. That's what we do. It wasn't arrogance, it was conviction. These Americans lived by something unseen, something beyond orders: principle. Each day, work was assigned. Some tended vegetable gardens, others helped in the kitchens. Even the tasks felt fair. No beatings, no shouting. Discipline replaced fear, and the camp began to breathe. Aiko learned English from a guard named Miller. He taught her words like freedom and home. She couldn't understand why an enemy would want her to speak his language, yet his patience never faltered. In the evenings, the guards read books aloud. Mark Twain, Lincoln's speeches. The words were foreign but powerful. "All men are created equal," Miller read. Aiko didn't know if that included her, but she hoped it did. Once a storm ripped through the camp, flooding the barracks. Soldiers and prisoners worked side by side to clear the water. No orders, no hesitation, just hands helping hands. That night, respect replaced fear. When an American cook burned his hand, Aiko instinctively rushed to help. The men laughed, surprised. For the first time, she wasn't a prisoner, she was a nurse again. That moment changed something inside her. She realized the Americans hadn't taken her dignity. They had returned it. The enemy had done what her own empire had never allowed, to see her as a person. Letters arrived once a month, censored but real. When she read "Mother is alive," she wept quietly. The guard who handed her the envelope looked away, pretending not to see. Even mercy had manners here. Some women still distrusted it all, saying, "They're tricking us for information." But information gathered through kindness felt like honesty, not manipulation. The Americans' secret weapon was decency. At dusk, Aiko often stood by the fence, staring at the flag. It didn't symbolize conquest anymore. It stood for something steadier, the idea that power could exist without cruelty. By now, she no longer jumped at footsteps or flinched at orders. America hadn't broken her spirit, it had redefined it. She began to understand that honor could survive even in captivity, because in that camp, she had witnessed the quiet strength of a nation that conquered without hatred. A place where compassion itself became the mark of victory. Weeks turned into months, and life inside the camp began to follow a rhythm. Simple, structured, calm. To the Japanese women, it felt like a strange kind of peace, one built on rules instead of fear. Every morning, the guards stood for roll call facing the flag. They didn't look like conquerors. They looked like men who believed in something invisible: duty. The prisoners watched, unable to understand that kind of pride. In Japan, loyalty meant obedience. Here, loyalty seemed to mean conscience. The Americans followed orders, yes, but never blindly. And that difference unsettled the women more than chains ever could. Classes began in the recreation hall. English lessons, basic arithmetic, even geography. "You should know where you are," one officer said. Education was not punishment here. It was trust. Aiko practiced new words on scraps of paper: hope, future, freedom. Each one felt heavy, like a secret code only the Americans understood. She whispered them at night like prayers. Music became the camp's quiet heartbeat. Harmonicas, guitars, even a piano the Red Cross sent. The guards invited the women to listen during Sunday evenings. No propaganda, no speeches, just songs. One night, an old sergeant played Amazing Grace. The melody drifted across the wire. Aiko didn't know the words, but the sound carried something unmistakable: forgiveness. The women began to change. They still wore the label enemy, but inside something had shifted. The Americans had fought them without hatred and captured them without cruelty, and that demanded reflection. Even small gestures carried meaning: a guard tipping his hat, a nurse handing over aspirin, a smile that asked for nothing in return. It was a new kind of power: quiet, confident, humane. One afternoon, a visiting journalist toured the camp. He wrote later that the Japanese women seem astonished by American kindness. His report never made the front page, but the truth didn't need headlines to endure. Aiko wondered what her commanders would think if they saw her now, writing English words, laughing with guards, drinking coffee under a flag she once despised. Maybe they'd call it betrayal. She called it awakening. For the first time, she realized that civilization wasn't measured by monuments or armies. It was measured by how a victor treated the defeated, and in that, America stood taller than she could have imagined. The camp fences still stood, but the walls in her mind were falling fast. America had shown its strength not through domination, but through restraint. And that restraint, that quiet sense of justice, was the true secret these women would one day carry home. Proof that even in war, freedom could remain merciful. It began with paper, thin, lined, stamped with a red eagle. "You may write one letter home," the officer said. The women stared in disbelief. Japan had told them Americans silenced their prisoners. Aiko held the pencil like it was a weapon. What could she say? That she was fed? That her wounds had healed? That the enemy had treated her better than her own officers ever had? Her first words trembled. "Mother, I am alive. They feed us. They are kind." It felt almost dangerous to write it. Truth had become treason. Around her, the other women wrote too. Some cried quietly. Others smiled for the first time in months. The guards didn't rush them. Time itself seemed to slow for this act of humanity. When the letters were collected, the American sergeant promised, We'll send them safely. His tone wasn't pity. It was respect, the kind that treats even an enemy's voice as sacred. Weeks passed before any replies came. One morning, Aiko was called to the front gate. "Mail from Japan," the clerk said. Her hands shook as she opened the envelope. Inside was one sentence: "You are forgiven." She pressed the letter to her face, tears falling into the dust. For the first time since the war began, she felt clean. Somewhere across the ocean, her mother knew mercy still existed, because of America. Soon word spread through the camp. Japan had intercepted some of the letters. Officers back home were confused. How could their captured women write of comfort, food, even laughter? The empire's newspapers ignored it, but whispers reached civilians. "The Americans do not torture women," someone said in Osaka. It was a rumor that softened even hardened hearts. One translator prisoner was asked why the Americans allowed this. Her answer stunned the others: "Because they don't need to be cruel to prove they've won." The women began to volunteer for small jobs around the camp, teaching Japanese, helping in kitchens, tending gardens. It wasn't submission, it was gratitude expressed through work. When Red Cross inspectors arrived, they found gardens in bloom and laughter echoing from the dining hall. One officer whispered, "This is not a prison. This is America." Aiko kept her mother's letter tucked in her sleeve, like a prayer. Every time the flag rose at dawn, she thought of that single sentence: "You are forgiven," and wondered if her captors deserved the same. Because the true secret of those camps was not what America did to its enemies, but what it refused to do. In mercy, it revealed its might. And as more letters reached Japan, a quiet revolution began. One written not in bullets, but in ink. Spring sunlight spilled over the camp one morning, and the guards brought out small paper envelopes. Inside were seeds. "Plant them," an officer said. "Make something grow." The Japanese women exchanged confused looks. They were prisoners, not farmers. But the Americans insisted, "You'll feel better if you build, not wait." It wasn't an order. It was an invitation. Aiko knelt in the dry earth, her fingers tracing the soil like a wound that could heal. She had patched soldiers before, but this was different. She was patching the world. The first sprout appeared a week later, tiny, trembling, but alive. Around it, the women gathered silently, as if watching hope itself rise from the dirt. The guards smiled but said nothing. They didn't need to. Every green leaf that broke the ground was a message. Life could begin again, even here. Soon the garden became the camp's heart. Flowers, beans, even tomatoes grew in neat rows. The Americans called it the Freedom Patch. The women called it our home. At sunset, they'd sit near the fence, watching the sky turn gold. One guard played his harmonica softly, and Aiko hummed along. In that sound, there was no victor or vanquished, only people. A new routine emerged: work in the morning, lessons in the afternoon, music and laughter at dusk. Captivity had become community. The Americans often joked, "You run the camp better than we do." And maybe in a way they did, because they had learned from their captors what true order looked like: discipline without cruelty. The Red Cross called the camp a model of humanity. But to the women, it was something deeper, proof that the enemy could teach them grace. Aiko found herself teaching Japanese words to curious soldiers. They, in turn, taught her English phrases like second chance and moving on. Each word was a bridge. One night, the captain addressed the prisoners directly. "You may hate us," he said, "but one day remember this: kindness is also a kind of strength. No propaganda, no force, just quiet conviction." The women didn't answer, but that night, even the wind through the fences seemed gentler. Because in that garden, in the soil of a foreign land, they had planted more than seeds. They had planted understanding. By midsummer, the camp no longer felt like a cage. The women still woke to the sound of guards, but it was no longer a sound of fear. It was routine, rhythm, order. New buildings rose inside the fences. Classrooms. "You'll learn English," said Captain Harris, "and American history too." The idea felt absurd. What use was history to prisoners? Yet the lessons were unlike anything they had known. No shouting, no punishments, just questions and conversation. Freedom, they realized, could live even behind barbed wire. Iko learned about Lincoln and his belief that mercy bears richer fruits than strict justice. The words hit her harder than any bullet. Was this what made America different? The guards treated them with steady respect. Even small mistakes were corrected with patience, not anger. The Japanese women were beginning to see power didn't always need to humiliate. When the camp held its first Sunday service, the guards invited them to attend. No one was forced. Some women came just to watch, and what they saw stunned them. Soldiers praying for peace, not victory. Iko asked a translator, "Why would they pray for their enemies?" The woman replied softly, "Because they think forgiveness makes them stronger." The Americans didn't talk about honor. They lived it. Their discipline came from choice, not fear. That difference shook everything the women had been taught about strength. One afternoon, Iko helped the camp librarians sort through boxes of donated books. "You can keep one," he said. She chose a small copy of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, freedom between the pages. Reading became escape, and in that escape, she found understanding. The more she learned about America, the less she could hate it. Her English improved quickly, and soon she could write short notes. "Thank you for today," she wrote to Miller, the guard who'd first taught her. He smiled and said, "You're getting better. Almost American." That phrase made her laugh, but inside it stirred something deeper. Could kindness really be stronger than loyalty? Could the enemy's mercy rebuild what war had destroyed? Each sunset seemed to answer yes. The fences still stood, but they no longer felt like walls. They were simply lines, and beyond them waited a wider world. The women had entered the camp as captives of war. Now they were becoming students of freedom, and America was their unlikely teacher. By autumn, the fences had begun to fade into the background. The women worked freely within the camp, often side by side with the same soldiers who once guarded them. Friendship had replaced suspicion. One evening, while carrying water, Iko tripped and fell. A young Marine rushed to help her up, his hands muddy, his smile awkward. "You're okay," he said, the first English phrase she fully understood. After that, she saw him often. His name was Thomas. He taught her how to throw a baseball, though she never quite learned to aim straight. Each time she missed, he laughed, not at her, but with her. The other women teased her gently, whispering that she had an American shadow. She denied it, but the warmth in her cheeks said otherwise. It wasn't love. Not yet. It was something quieter, more dangerous. Understanding. For the first time, Iko saw an American not as a symbol, but as a person. Thomas, too, was changing. He'd seen the war's worst. Men burned, friends lost. Yet here, in the stillness of the camp, he found peace in small things. A shared word, a laugh, a fragile trust. One evening, he brought her a folded paper crane. "They say this means hope in your country," he said. She stared at it, speechless. The enemy had learned her language of peace. The moment spread like wildfire through the camp. An American giving a Japanese prisoner a symbol of hope. Even the guards smiled quietly, pretending not to notice. At night, Iko couldn't sleep. She thought of her brother who had died fighting men like Thomas. Yet somehow, his kindness made her grief hurt less, as if humanity itself was healing her. Soon, other guards began treating the women with a similar warmth. Small jokes, shared meals, respectful distance. The war outside seemed to shrink a little each day. The Americans didn't try to convert them, didn't preach or boast. Their kindness wasn't performance, it was habit. That made it even more powerful. Iko began to wonder if strength wasn't about conquest at all, but compassion. If so, then America had already won in ways Japan never could. When a new group of POWs arrived, frightened and silent, Iko comforted them. "Don't be afraid," she said softly. "They treat us kindly here." In that moment, she realized she had crossed a line, from captive to guide. And as the autumn wind rustled the American flag above the camp, she finally understood its meaning. Not dominance, but dignity. It was an ordinary morning when the news came. The guards didn't cheer, didn't shout. They simply lowered their hats. "The war is over," one said quietly. "Japan has surrendered." Silence swept the camp like wind through tall grass. Some women gasped. Others just stared at the ground. The war that had shaped their pain was gone, and they didn't know whether to feel joy or loss. Aiko's hands trembled as she whispered, "So, it's over?" Her guard nodded. "It's over." His voice carried no victory, only relief. The kind of relief that comes when killing finally stops. That night, the camp lights dimmed early. No one sang, no one spoke. The women sat together under the faint hum of insects, wondering what waited for them beyond the fences. To the Americans, the war's end meant going home. To the Japanese prisoners, it meant facing home, a home they feared might no longer want them. Captain Harris gathered them the next morning. "You'll be repatriated soon," he said. "You'll go home safe, with our respect." Respect. That word struck harder than any command ever had. The women were given new clothes, food for the journey, even small packages of American chocolate. "A gift," said one guard, smiling shyly. "So you don't forget us." Aiko tucked hers carefully into her bag, next to her mother's letter and the paper crane. The three objects, mercy, forgiveness, and hope, felt like her true belongings. When the trains came, the guards stood in formation. No jeering, no celebration. Just salutes, soldier to soldier, human to human. Some women cried openly. One reached through the train window to grasp an American's hand. "Thank you," she whispered in broken English. "Thank you for treating us like people." The train moved slowly, cutting across endless plains. As the camp faded from view, Aiko realized something unthinkable. She would miss this place. The camp had shown her what freedom really looked like. Outside, America rolled past. Golden fields, small towns, waving children. It wasn't a land of conquerors, it was a land that believed mercy was strength. She watched the flag flutter one last time from the train window and whispered, "Maybe this was where I was reborn." Because though she was going home to Japan, the woman who left America would never again see the world as she once had. The ship docked at Yokohama under gray skies. Smoke still rose from the ruins, and the air smelled of ash and sea salt. Japan was silent, humbled, broken. Aiko stepped onto the pier, clutching her small bundle, a blanket, a letter, a paper crane. Around her, family searched for faces that war had erased. She expected to feel joy. Instead, she felt like a stranger in her own homeland. America had freed her body, but Japan was where her heart had to prove its loyalty. Her mother met her at the station, thin and trembling. When she saw her daughter alive, she dropped to her knees in tears. "You came back," she whispered. "You didn't die with honor, but you lived." Those words pierced deeper than any wound. Lived, not died. For years, she had believed that life itself was weakness. Now it was her only act of defiance. The village was wary. Some neighbors whispered that the returned prisoners had been corrupted by the enemy's kindness. Aiko didn't argue. How could she explain that compassion was her greatest lesson? At night, she lay awake listening to the quiet, remembering the camp's laughter, the harmonica, the smell of bread. The silence of home felt heavier than the fences of captivity. She found work as a nurse again, tending to wounded soldiers who had survived worse than her. When she treated their scars, she remembered the American medics who once treated hers. Some patients spat insults when they learned she had been captured. "You should have died," one hissed, but Aiko only smiled faintly. "I already did," she whispered, "and then I lived again." The paper crane stayed on her bedside table. Each morning she unfolded it, read the faint English words written inside. "Hope never surrenders." She wondered if Thomas had written it for her before she left. She wanted to hate America again. It would have made life easier. But hatred felt impossible now. She had seen the country's soul up close, and it wasn't what her teachers had described. Her mother noticed the change in her eyes. "You look different," she said. "Calmer." Aiko answered, "I saw the enemy's heart, Mother, and it was kinder than ours." For years, she kept her story secret. Japan was rebuilding, proud and silent, unwilling to hear that mercy could exist in defeat. But she carried that truth quietly, like a second heartbeat, because she had learned something that even victory could never teach. Sometimes the side that shows compassion wins the war that history never records. Decades passed. Japan rose from ruins into glass and steel. Children played in parks where ashes once lay, and the old war began to fade into silence. But for Aiko, the past never truly left. She grew old quietly, tending a small garden behind her home. The same soil that once buried despair now grew flowers. Daisies, not unlike those in the camp's garden long ago. Neighbors saw her as kind, but distant. Only her closest friends knew she had once been a prisoner. Fewer still knew what she carried, the secret that had rewritten her soul. One day, a young historian from Tokyo visited her. "We're collecting testimonies from survivors," he said. "Would you share yours?" She hesitated. The truth was too strange for textbooks. But then she remembered the letter from her mother, the paper crane, and the guard who once said, "Kindness is also a kind of strength." So she nodded and began to speak. She told him about the camp, the food, the music, the laughter. She spoke of the Americans who treated their prisoners not as enemies, but as equals. "They taught me freedom without saying the word," she said. The young man listened in awe. "But they were your captors," he said. Aiko smiled softly. "No, they were my teachers." Her words spread quietly through the historian's notes, then through articles, and finally into books. What began as a single story became a spark, a reminder that even in war, mercy leaves a mark deeper than hate. Years later, her story reached the United States. A newspaper ran the headline, "Japanese POW thanks American guards for saving her humanity." Across the ocean, old soldiers read it and wept. Some wrote letters back, their handwriting shaky with age. "We just did our duty," one veteran wrote. But Aiko knew it was more than that. It was proof that morality had survived the fire. On her final birthday, she visited a nearby American memorial. She left her paper crane at the base of the flagpole and whispered, "You showed me who I could be." The wind lifted the crane gently, its wings fluttering against the morning sun. For a moment, it seemed alive, carrying her secret across oceans one last time. Because the greatest truth she had learned in captivity was not about defeat or surrender, but about the power of grace. It was America's quietest weapon and its most lasting victory.